This is just a follow-up video to my video yesterday on Avalanche versus Cardano. Somebody reached out to me and recommended I watch this video, and it was a very good video to watch. This video is going to be very unscripted, so I'm just really just going to talk, and so it won't be as polished as yesterday's video. But I'll take you through what I found interesting about this video here, which was by IOHK, and it was a video that they had at their recent conference back in September. It's one that I hadn't got around to seeing, so I'm glad somebody pointed it out to me. So this Cardano Summit 2021. The interesting bits for me in particular were around parallel chains, which I'll come on to, but let me just take you through what the rest of the video talks about. So this screen that I'm on now, this is all about self-healing. What this means is if you're in a situation where your blockchain has been taken over by a malicious actor and they've got more than 50% of the active stake, and how could that happen, may you say? The example they used was if there was some global internet outage that knocked out a lot of nodes, so you were left with these malicious actors actually being the dominant node operators, and then they went and produced some bad blocks essentially. After the rest of the node operators come back online, there is the ability for Cardano to heal itself. They didn't go into too much detail into how that worked. I think there's another paper somewhere I can read into, but that's what this was talking about. It was particularly interesting because the presenter was saying how this is a feature of what they're calling the longest chain. I think they call it the longest chain protocol, which I referred to yesterday as the Nakamoto consensus. And it's something that's harder to do in the BFT protocol that Avalanche uses. That's what the presenter said. So yeah, definitely worth a listen. That I didn't fully follow this slide. It wasn't very well explained, but I thought that was quite interesting. Moving on. This part of the video was talking about what to do or what would happen if parts of the network were separated from one another and they couldn't communicate with one another temporarily. Does the blockchain continue working in separate parts? That's called liveness. And then when they're reconnected, they'll kind of reach a global consensus. Or does it do the safety first approach, which is on the far right, where everything stops working, nobody operates until everybody's back online again? And so the debate as to how you want it to operate, some people might want this, some people might want that. So there's some middle ground there where ideally you'd want to have both situations depending on what different participants want. It's still being discussed, but they said in cryptographic circles, the discussion is around the use of checkpoints, both in the longest chain, aka Nakamoto based approach, where the network would every so often, by the sounds of it, checkpoint what is the correct longest chain. And so in the event of some outages, when they're back online and there's any dispute, they can just revert back to the last checkpoint to agree on what was the longest chain. And then in the safety first approach, which is far right, where everybody has stopped working altogether, when everybody is back online, they would also refer to a checkpoint and they'll continue from there. So in that case, I guess a checkpoint is more like just a snapshot of the entire network that was taken every so often. Have a watch of that. I may have maybe got some of my facts wrong there, but that's what I took away from this part of the video. Okay, so now we're getting more onto the issue of scalability. So this was the input endorsers I talked about in yesterday's video, and I said I wasn't quite sure how exactly they were going to make it work. If you're interested in scalability, I recommend watching the video from this point at the very least. The rest of it is interesting as well, but in particular from here onwards, it was quite interesting. So here's how I understood it. Right now, if you imagine those blue blocks, those are the blocks that are being produced by your stake pool operators. So that's the heartbeat of the Cardano network, as Charles put it in one of his recent AMA. Right now, they are the ones carrying the transactions. So those transactions I talked about that chill out in the pool area, and then they get added to a block. That blue is the block that they get added to, and then they get processed by a stake pool operator. The idea here is, instead of those blue blocks carrying the actual transactions, you have those transactions wrapped up in what's known as an input block. And those input blocks can be produced in parallel. They're not dependent on the timeliness of these blue blocks, which is the heartbeat of the Cardano network. So you can have loads of these sort of all lined up, and then for every one of these heartbeats, the ranking block, as they call it, will just be referencing one or more of these blocks of transactions that it's then going to be responsible for processing and validating. That's kind of the basic idea of it. I'm not quite sure exactly how that all works. I've actually got a lot of questions about it, but that was how they explained it. One of the questions I had about it was they said that ordering did not matter, that you can produce one of these input blocks, and it didn't matter if it didn't get included in the next sort of heartbeat, if it instead got used over here or further down the line. What I don't know is, what does that mean in terms of, if A is paying B and then B is using that money to pay C, then obviously ordering matters. B can't pay C until A has paid B. How does it deal with that? I don't know. It'd be good to find out. My hunch is it's probably related to the PAB, or the fact that to have these transactions get to this point in the journey, they've already been validated by the PAB. So the chances of them failing are probably quite low. So if we're talking a few seconds, then it probably doesn't matter whether it's included here, or just a few seconds later. Maybe that's what the answer is. But that was one of the questions I had around it. The key takeaway here is this will increase transactions per second, because suddenly you can have lots of these transactions all just sort of being produced, and then they get added to a block in due course. But you're not going to have a bandwidth issue. So suddenly you've got an unlimited bandwidth to fit in as many transactions as you want. Your transactions will not get rejected. And that should help with things like NFT drops, where suddenly loads of people are producing these transactions, and they're also existing here. They're not getting rejected. No one's going to have to redo it twice, etc. But then the bigger question is, well, when do these transactions get actually executed, what we call finality? And that was the second part of of what I'm going to cover, or the last part of this presentation. So what you see on the screen here, that will deal with transactions per second, the bandwidth, the pipeline, but it's not actually, in my opinion, what's the more important metric, finality. How long after you submit a transaction does it take for it to actually settle? And so for fast settlement, the idea that was mentioned was parallel chains. So you actually have multiple blockchains all running. And when you have a transaction, you throw it onto all 4 chains in this particular example. And then I guess one of the blockchains will execute it faster than the other and maybe propagate it, I guess. They didn't go into too much detail. I'll have to look around to see if there's any white papers or anything on this, or wait for the blog post. Again, I had a few questions in my head around this. I mean, I guess it must mean that, let's say there's 4 blockchains or 10 blockchains. They must all be running at once on every node. Is that how it works? Would there be different, just like currently, there's a single, at each heartbeat, a single stake pool gets selected to carry out a transaction. In this case, does that mean there'll be multiple different stake pools being selected, and they're all carrying out transactions at the same time, which I think makes sense, because you've got all these staple operators waiting around, and only one of them is doing actual work, so to speak. So in that sense, I can see how that might make sense. So yeah, it'd be interesting to find out a bit more about this. Definitely an interesting idea. The limitation is, as the number of transactions increase, you'd have to keep adding on more parallel chains. I think I saw another video from a few years back as I was trying to dig into this a bit further, that this is only when you want to speed up the when you got a full capacity blockchain, where initially one chain might be enough, but if you find that it's reached a certain threshold, you might then start using 2 chains, and then if it's reached another threshold, you might start using 3 chains, and so on. So I'd be interested to know if that's a dynamic process, or is it going to be set up to have 5 running, and then somebody has to change a parameter manually somewhere to make it 6 or 7 or 10, etc. But that's what the idea is. If they can pull that off, then yes, and I'm sure they can. I've got no reason to think they wouldn't. But that should definitely help speed up finality. So if you had, let's say, this one chain running at, I don't know, 10 minutes for finality, adding a second one on, I would imagine, would then divide that in half, make it 5 minutes. Adding a third one on should reduce it even further, and so on. So yeah, look forward to hearing more about that. I found it a very interesting video. I may have gotten my facts wrong, so don't rely on what I'm saying. Please do watch this video. I found it quite interesting. Maybe that's just a nerd in me. But hopefully I've whet your appetite enough for you to want to watch it. That's all from me. Just wanted to share those thoughts. As ever, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I hope you all have a great day.